Hello there. My tasting journey today takes me to Greece, and we're looking at a wine from a producer called Kechris, and this is their Tear the Pine Retsina. Now, Retsina is described as being an appellation by tradition, and my understanding is for that reason they're not allowed to put the vintage of the wine on the bottle. In general, I suppose it's the case that Retsina is not generally intended to age, and therefore I guess when they produced the regulations they didn't think that was necessary. So instead the Kechri family tell us that they first produced a vintage of Tears Pine in 2005, and this is the 10th release since that. So from that we can deduce this is the 2015 vintage of this particular wine. But as I say, legally you can't put that date directly on the label. Now, Tear of the Pine is arguably the best and most age-worthy Retsina on the market these days. Retsina is a traditional Greek wine style, and what's particular about Retsina is that the wine is flavoured by the addition of pine resin. Originally this would have come about because of the sealing of old amphorae with pine resin, and certainly it gives the wine very pungent flavours. Now, most Retsina is made with a grape variety called Savatino, and in some ways this is a problem because Savatino oxidizes quite readily. It's a white grape variety, and therefore the wines that are made from Savatino should be drunk relatively early in their life. Consuming these wines made young and fresh results in there being very little within the wine to balance the very pungent flavours and aromas of the pine resin, which really rather take over. This wine, however, is made from another grape variety. This is made from Assyrtiko, better known for the really lean mineral style of high acid whites being made from it on the island of Santorini. The wine's also had a pre-fermentation cold maceration, been oak fermented, and it's had lees aging. So there's plenty going on here to try and give more balance to the wine so that the pine doesn't stand out as readily as a flavour from the rest of the wine. On top of that, this wine has gained some complexity by the fact that it's aged in my cellars for 9 years. It's a 10-year-old wine, and so should have gained some complexity as a result of that. The story of Kechris as a winery goes back to 1939 when four brothers opened a Taverna in the middle of old Thessaloniki. Not only did they run the Taverna, but they also made a Retsina called Kechribari, which is even today is Kechris's most important brand. Demand for their wines was such that by 1954 they decided they needed to build a winery. As well as Retsina, they also made still wines, ouzo, brandy, and then a range of liqueurs. 20 years later, in 1974, saw them starting to export, and at first exports were predominantly to Germany. Now, it was in 1978 that Stelios Kechris, the third generation of his family, finished his studies in winemaking at the University at Dijon in France and returned to the family winery full of ideas as to how modern winemaking should be implemented. In 1984, Stelios took over the running of the winery and spent 15 years modernising both the winery and their approaches in the vineyard. As well, however, as bringing all their facilities up to international standards, Stelios decided that the best idea was to focus on the production of Retsina. 15 years later, in 1999, Stelios' hard work yielded fruit when his Kechribari Retsina won a medal at the Thessaloniki International Wine Challenge. This was completely unheard of for Retsina. Nobody was aware of a Retsina having won a medal at a competition before. And this inspired Stelios to continue, and then in 2005 he produced the first vintage of this wine, Tear the Pine, really aiming to make a top-class Retsina. In 2006 the wine won a gold medal at the Thessaloniki International Wine Show, and subsequently there have been many other gold medals in competitions such as the Decanter World Wine Award, Mundo Vini, and this wine also has a gold medal here from the Vinales International. So I think quite clearly these are wines that have been recognised as high quality Retsina. The wine, as I say, is made 100% from the quality white grape Assyrtiko. These grapes were grown in northern Macedonia in the Goumenissa region, which is at slightly lower altitude and slightly to the northeast of the more famous Naousa wine producing region. Temperatures here are warm, conditions are dry. Soils tend to be clay loams over a limestone base and are naturally free draining. Vines here tend to produce quite concentrated grapes as a result of all these factors. Fruit is picked, and once it reaches the winery in Kalochori, which is about 10 kilometers from the center of Thessaloniki, it undergoes a pre-fermentation cold soak and is then pressed into a selection of new French oak barrels for fermentation. During that fermentation, there's an addition of pine resin. This is resin from the Olympou pine. The resin almost has the consistency of a sort of a grease, and adding it during the fermentation ensures it integrates well with the flavours and the aromas of the wine. The finished wine then ages for 6 months in barrel with its lees, and with lees stirring going on all the time to try and add sort of rich, creamy notes to the wine. As the dead yeast lees are kept in suspension, and they sort of slowly break down there over a period of about 6 months prior to the wine being bottled. So let's take a look at the wine, shall we? Start by saying there really is a lovely, deep, rich yellow to pale gold colour there. There's a sort of a slightly bronze robe to the whole thing. Swelling it, the wine appears reasonably viscous, although it's a little reticent to throw tears on the side of the glass there. The wine has 13.5% alcohol, so should have a reasonable weightiness to it. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? There's some really pungent notes. Pine notes are very obvious, but there really is a vivid sort of pine needle nature to it. Also, there's something in the aromas. It's quite rich and sweet, almost like a nougat underpinning the whole thing. There's something in the combination of those two things that makes me think of eating halva. So let's have a taste, shall we? Gosh, the pungency of the nose really does follow through onto the palate. You've got this sort of vivid notes of pine, but there are other herbal notes. There's marjoram, there's rosemary, and behind that there's a richness of sort of lemon and grapefruit notes. There are nutty notes. I'm thinking of pistachio here. There's a rounded creaminess and a buttery nature coming from the batonnage. But there's good acidity. I've mentioned lemoniness, and there's a crispness running down the sides of my tongue there. There's almost honeyed note, but the pine resin actually stops that from being sort of rounded and sweet, and you get more of a sort of a greenish pine twang there. As I'm describing these pungent flavours and aromas, it actually seems quite discordant. Actually, they're beautifully in harmony. Given the fact the wine's spent 10 years in bottle, I think they've had plenty of time to marry, and the wine changes from flavour to flavour quite seamlessly. The flavours are long. There's a freshness, there's a juiciness to the fruit, and then there are these pungent notes, almost sort of soapy marjoram flavours. The wine has its own completely unique character, but there is plenty of richness on the side of the fruit that is managing to balance the very strong pine elements in the flavour. As I say, the acidity is given some liveliness to the fruit. The alcohol doesn't particularly impose itself on the back palate. It's obviously there. It's adding a little bit of warmth and roundness, but not very noticeably so. This is a hugely interesting wine. I'm seeing more and more in it as I look at it for longer. The pungency of its elements would make it a really good match for some quite strong flavours. Ceviche, that sort of thing, with fish, with oil, with vinegar, those sort of notes. A Greek salad where it would be competing with olive oil, with olives, with tomato, with onion, with capsicum, and feta. Some quite strong, fresh, clean flavours. This would go up against really nicely. Grilled fish, I think, would be another lovely counterpoint to this. Now, I looked at the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this vintage of this wine. It gets 89 out of 100. I think that's a pretty reasonable score, although given that I'm coming back to it 10 years later and it still tastes so good, maybe it probably should have been given a 90 or a 91. I will leave a link in the notes below so you can follow that to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this one, and you can find out all about it from the various information on that page, everything from pricing and availability through to vintage comparison, what the critics have said, what other users have said, some background on winemaking information, the region, the producer. Hopefully all the information you could possibly need to make an informed decision about buying a wine. So thank you again for joining us. If you've enjoyed the video, do please press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, it would be fantastic if you'd sign up and follow us. If you subscribe, you can then also set yourself an alert and be notified every time we publish a new tasting. If you have any comments, pop those in the comments box below, please. We'd love to hear from you about what you think about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. Similarly, if you have friends you think might like to watch the video, find out more about Tears of Pine and Kechri's very different interpretation of Retsina, do please feel free to pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate your endorsement of our videos in this way. So thank you again, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time good and soon to come and watch another video with us. Until then, bye for now.